The Get On Living Safely campaign is sponsoring this podcast to remind you to keep your spending in the community. Supporting local businesses keeps food on the table for our friends and neighbors. Follow them on social media and learn more at getonlivingsafely.com. On this episode, we sat down with Tyink and Kortbein, co-authors of the book Grief Reimagined, 50 Creative Strategies to Build Resilience. We talk about grief, first steps in healing, how COVID has affected the process, and where people can find out more. I'm Amy.
And I'm Brent.
And this is La Crosse Local.
My name is Tyink, and I have lived in Wisconsin my whole life. We got into writing this project. This is our first book, the first book we've written together. We got into writing it because we saw all of the people that we've known and stories we've read, and we thought, God, there's so much cool, creative things people are doing in times of loss. But the books you hear, a lot of the self-help books, Brent, are more geared towards my story. Like, okay, I lost my husband, I lost my son and daughter, and how I overcame it, which is great. But we wanted to share other people's stories and styles, and to inspire anyone, no matter what their personality type is or their preferred methods are. So that inspired us to do the interviews. We did over 70 interviews to write the book.
And my name's Kortbein, and I'm an art therapist by trade. And let's see, I was born the suburbs of Chicago, but I've lived in Wisconsin, in many different cities in Wisconsin for most of the time. I live in Florida now, but as Catherine mentioned, we sort of have always had this idea to create this collection of stories, because through my professional career, I've experienced so many times working with people doing creative art therapy or creative type therapeutic activities where people are floored by how engaged they are with the process. And we wondered if there was a way to sort of combine creative activity. And we saw a lot of stories and heard a lot of stories, but wanted to make this collection of stories so that we could, use it as a resource, not just for general population people, but also for professionals, social workers and school counselors, because we knew how much people in the helping profession need resources that they can go to help others through the process of grief.
The book is called Grief Reimagined, 50 Creative Strategies to Build Resilience. So what can people expect when diving into a piece like this? I'm sure it's definitely helpful to hear other stories from different angles, but what can people expect?
Real life stories. Each of the 50 strategies is partnered with a real life story. So it's the kind of book where you don't need a lot of time. We're thinking about people dealing with major health issues or deep into grief. They could open the book at any part and read a story and maybe just get something from that, some bit of inspiration. And we went deeper than just the typical, like everybody knows, like, okay, you want to eat healthy and pay attention to your diet. You want to get enough sleep, sleep hygiene is important, and exercise. But we wanted to go deeper into truly creative strategies to build resilience. So you might open it up and hear something about humor. You might hear something that's food related. You might hear something that has to do with nature. Easy, quick reads, quick nuggets. We're kind of a grab and go society right now, and that's how the book is geared. And also a very beautiful book, thicker paper. It's a great touch book, lots of images throughout.
As you know, and probably based on the stories, I'm sure the stories are uniquely different. Grief can be taken and kind of digested in so many different ways, from a short turnaround to dealing with it for years. What thematic themes have you found throughout this book and these stories?
In particular, I think three themes that continue to present themselves: the healing properties of nature, the arts, so the big capital A, writing, artwork, engaging in creative activities, and animals. There's always really interesting stories that collaborate with those three themes. But I think the one important thing is there's a potential with loss for people to get stuck with their internal thoughts and to get stuck on tapes in their head and to do a lot of ruminating. And maybe the rumination is about pity or, why did this happen to me, or whatever the emotions that is presenting themselves for their particular loss. And the beauty of reading these stories is how people engaged in bringing that loss in. Instead of resisting it and ruminating about it, they took action. And that's kind of our big theme that we are trying to present with this book. Is David Kessler, who is a protege of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, found that there's this sixth stage of grief, which is giving meaning to loss. And so with these 50 stories, we hope that people will find that way to give meaning to whatever loss it is, not just the loss of a loved one, but there's many types of loss that people experience throughout life. That was kind of the goal that we were setting, is to give meaning to all of these types of loss.
Yeah, and just adding a bit to what Christine is saying is that the other thing we found out is that we didn't just focus stories on loss due to death, though there are stories like that. There's loss due to divorce. There's loss due to moving. There's loss due to empty nesters. There's all kinds of, there's loss due to moving from boyhood to manhood. So there's all kinds of change and loss. And the way you can build resilience is lots and lots of possibilities, but there's strategies in doing something, getting away from, as Christine really said in an eloquent way, I think, that rumination towards action.
We were talking about this actually recently with a recent COVID death of a friend of ours. Their father passed away. Grief is kind of an overwhelming time, and a lot of people want to help. They want to reach out and, the most correct, I guess, manner, even give books, even though at that time, some people are just like, leave me alone in some capacity. Some people are inviting. Can you give advice on how people can take kind of like the first step?
I would say that's basically the reason behind the book, is because these stories are nice, short, small little nuggets. It's not that we want people to, for sure, buy this book, although we'd love to, but it gives them a great idea of where to start. Because the most difficult thing for people in loss is just, they don't want to have to think about anything. They're just overwhelmed with everything. The world is on your shoulders and you don't even know if you can make another step. And so by having these creative strategies, it gives someone just this tiny little nugget, even if it's not the exact same thing. In other words, for example, there's a wonderful story about baking sadness, a person who moved a lot and felt this loss of friends and environment. And by just having this ritual of baking every time they moved, the family not only provided this strategy in order to sort of process the feelings, but it was this activity where you could actually talk about it together. The baking was primary, but then talking about it could be secondary, where you'd actually have an activity where you could talk about feelings. So sometimes I think you need to provide for people, whether it's even going for a walk, but maybe it's, engaging in artwork together, or there's many pet related things, or we have a story on forest bathing, getting out in nature. So just taking that one step. And when you're going through grief, you don't even want to think about what that next step is. And so having this toolkit developed, so that's the idea behind the book, is that we want you to make a toolkit so that this is ideas for resilience, not just in times of loss, but for any tragedy that ever comes into your life, that you will have this little toolkit of, I know this works for me. I know this always gives me some solace if I get out in nature, something to go to again and again.
Yeah, it's interesting to have those different, I guess, avenues in for people, because, loss and grief and, just day-to-day life is different for everybody. I'm sure also with this book, COVID has affected loss and grief, a lot. How has COVID affected grief and dealing with grief?
It was such a timely, we didn't know about COVID when we started the book, because we're all sitting at home alone in our own losses and thinking about the things and how it's different. And maybe it's not so good in lots of ways. And so I think COVID has brought grief to the forefront of our minds, and loss and change and adapting. And how can we boost our resilience? So I believe it's made the book more relevant to our society.
I would also say that the 50 stories illustrate, too, that loss of any kind has happened throughout human history. This is just a different version of it. And everyone ends up surviving, but we want to do more than just survive. We want to thrive. And so those are the people that we tried to sort of single out, is how did people thrive and flourish through loss and not just survive. So as we're going through COVID, there's losses on many, many, many different levels, whether it's job loss or loss from not seeing family. And we can do better than just getting by. We can actually use this as a time to make meaning also. So COVID is presenting us with the chance to learn things about ourselves that maybe we didn't know. And so I think that's kind of been a benefit. And also in a tangible sense, as we were writing these stories, COVID was beneficial for us because we could get a hold of all these people. Everybody was home and everybody wanted to answer our emails because we said, hey, tell us about your life.
Yeah.
So that was the wonderful thing about COVID. Maybe it wouldn't have happened as fast. Maybe it still probably would have happened, but not as quickly. But it was people were very accessible for us.
It was kind of surprising because there are some notable people in the book. We have a former Olympian. We have a Boston comedian that wrote a Coronavirus Rhapsody. If you're familiar with the parody of Bohemian Rhapsody, it's been viewed 100 million times now. And I don't think we would have reached him if he
wasn't stuck at home.
It seems interviewing a lot of creative people, a lot of people in this sort of industry, is that people have used this time to kind of renew and kind of almost invest in themselves and their artwork and music and things like that. So it's refreshing to see another kind of avenue being used for mental health purposes as well.
I agree. It's given us all the opportunity to have time. The things that we often say, oh, I don't have time I love drawing, but I don't have time for it. I love writing. I love going out and being in nature. Well, we had plenty of time. So if you haven't done it by now, you probably never will.
So if people want to follow along, what's the best avenue to pick up the book or just, see where you guys are at with your travels?
Right now it can be purchased through my website, which is the website is just my name, KristineKortbein.com. But we also have a Facebook page called Grief Reimagined Stories. And we encourage people to take a look at the Facebook page, but because we also have a lot of audience activity that we'd like people to comment on. We shared a contest where people were sharing ways that they felt comforted, what helped bring them solace. And so it's kind of fun to see what people's responses are. And we have a lot of links to stories if you are going through grief, that maybe there's a story on the Facebook page that might resonate for you.
Lacrosse Local Podcast is a production of River Travel Media. Do you have an interview idea you'd like to share with us? Message us on Facebook at Lacrosse Local. Find out more about us at lacrosselocal.com, and you can subscribe to the Lacrosse Local Podcast on your favorite podcast app. If you like us, rate us 5 stars. We appreciate it.